Hey guys, welcome back to the show. I have my next guest on before me, and I'm appreciative of him to be joining us. His name is Joel David Bond. That sounds like such a either evil villain name or a really cool actor name. Have you gotten that before?
No, I think you're the first to actually throw that out there. But I like that. I'll embrace the evil villain stereotype from
It's
time to
just, it's,
time.
I mean, it's Bond, so technically it's a hero, but it's just the way you put it together. Joel David Bond. Man,
All right.
it's really cool.
Sounds classy. That's what I like to think.
Classy, yeah. Well, Joel, thank you for joining us today. We're going to be talking about some great things. Definitely your book. We're going to talk about you living in Iraq, your encounters with refugees, and really just kind of, I think your mantra is what you're talking about is as large as your spirit and really exploring the acceptance of oneself and others, which I think is really great, and empathy, which is something that I think we're just lacking today in the world. And so it's good to get your perspective on that and really maybe open some others' eyes to how we can all be more empathetic, but also just better humans, if that's possible.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of my mission in life, really, is to see what I can do to help people develop, their sense of empathy and to develop their ability to communicate with others and connect. So,
yeah. Well, we'll get started first talking about your book. So, in your book, you mentioned that you chose to live in Iraq by choice. How did you experience? How was your experiences in Iraq influence your perspective and shape the narrative of your memoir?
oh well, Iraq has got such bad press in recent years, and I think my experience living over there really gave me a couple of things. One, that the news is only 1% of reality. That 99% of daily life is daily life. Getting up, going to work, taking the kids to school, going to buy milk at the supermarket. I mean, everybody does that in Iraq, just they do here in the US or anywhere else in the world. So, on one side of the equation, it was to see how normal everything was living there. The other thing that really helped influence the writing of this memoir, though, however, was actually seeing some of the root causes of the global migration crisis and the global refugee situation. Because 1% of the world's population is displaced due to global conflict.
Wow.
So that's not just Middle East, that's globally people from various places around the world who are displaced, but 1% is a pretty significant number. And so being in a place where, a fair chunk of that 1% is coming from places like Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan, not to mention other places around the world like Myanmar or Central African Republic, to sort of see how those political structures are feeding that exodus of people, how the instability of the infrastructure or the growing youth boom without really a lot of promise or prospect for work and progression in life is fueling a lot of people to leave and to move on to do other things, to migrate and emigrate. So I think being able to see that sort of root cause on the ground, and then also later on, as you'll read in the book, working with the sort of end result of migrants who've come out of those places and how do you get them resettled, really gave me a sort of a both ends of the spectrum perspective on migration, emigration, refugees, and just what causes that.
Wow. Yeah, and you're so right, because I think a lot of times I like to think people think of it as out of sight, out of mind. And the sheer ignorance is the fact you don't really want to employ yourself on what's out there. And you have, like you mentioned, the media, you have one side of what you see and you assume, oh, that's it. That's what it is.
Yeah.
And you're not really opening your eyes to the idea of like, you got it pretty good here in America for most parts. And, it's almost looking at the human nature of it all and being like, it's not the same for the people, and I'm pretty sure seeing that must have been just, I'm not gonna say soul crushing or devastating, but it must have been just a shock, but also kind of like, wow, this is what's happening in our world, and why are we not doing more to stop these things happening?
Yeah, I feel like particularly here in the US, I mean, we have one of the smallest rates of refugee acceptance into our country globally. I mean,
Yeah.
many other countries, and we sort of say, oh, we have all these refugees who come in. In all reality, it's sort of, you do the percentage per capita, like we have a very low rate of refugees that come in. And people sort of complain about, oh, they're going to take up all these services and use all the public money or whatever it is. Well, refugees are some of
Yes.
the hardest working people who, and I think this is one of the biggest things that I
Hmm.
realized, because again, I had this sort of bias before I ended up working with refugees. It's
Sure.
just like
Yeah. Of
everybody else. You have these
course.
biases that are informed by the media. And so I think, oh, well, refugees, they're going to be second class citizens. They're not going to be as well trained. They've, whatever it is. Most of my students on the island where I was caught for the pandemic, where I was teaching, they were doctors or lawyers or politicians or high-ranking members of society in their home countries that, for whatever reason, life became untenable for them to stay. Whether
Yeah.
it was they hold the opposing political ideology, whether it was because of their sexuality, whether it was because of family relationships or dynamics or poor economic systems, whatever it was, there was a collapse to their personal livelihood in the country that forced them to leave.
Wow.
And so you end up with these people who are now caught in the refugee and asylum seeking system, who are highly skilled, but unable to communicate that skill or translate that skill into a new culture. So
Right.
that's
Right.
always,
Absolutely.
that was really kind of the joy of being able to help them learn English, is because now I'm actually giving them a voice, a literal voice in a
Hmm.
language that will help them navigate those systems and hopefully rebuild their livelihood.
Wow. Man, that's amazing. And you're so right. It's a point of, because it is so minimum here in the States, we don't really see it. And it's just so crazy to think that you can have such a thing going great in your life and something happens and you have to almost rebuild. And the craziest thing is, like, in America, we rebuild all the time. People fall and fail and get up and try again. And it's almost like that's the American way to do things in a way. So it's kind of almost like, why could you see someone else going through the same process as a human being? It's like, we all do it. We're not perfect, but we seem to sometimes think we are. So it's so crazy to think that. In your memoir, you highlighted encounters with the refugees, which you talked a little bit about. You highlighted the universal truths learned about loving your neighbor. Can you elaborate on some of these encounters and the insight they provided for you?
Uh, yeah, so there's actually one instance that didn't make it into the book. It was kind of one
Mm,
of my favorite chapters that I really held dear to my heart, but had to cut because of just time and space. It didn't fit with the overall flow. But
okay.
before I ended up being stuck in Samos, I was in Athens for a few nights and ran across a young gentleman in the youth hostel where I was staying. And, he was sort of curled up, crumpled up like a, discarded piece of paper, like had been tossed to the wastebasket. He was just kind of sat on the edge of the bed and was hacking and coughing. And this is the beginning of the pandemic, right? So there's a
Mm,
sort of like, is this guy safe? Like, what's
right.
going on
Yeah.
here? Um, so I'm in this hostel room, and this guy is sitting there, and I can't even remember how the conversation we struck up a conversation, but I started asking him, where he's from or whatever, and he claimed he was from Romania. And so I was like, oh, I had some former students from Romania, and threw out a few words, and he just kind of gave me this blank stare. And it was only through the course of the conversation that I realized that the Romanian passport that he sort of showed me to prove his citizenship was fake. It was a fake passport that he
Wow.
was using to get into the EU, and that he was originally from in the Middle East, and had been sort of caught in the system, paying human traffickers to get through Turkey,
Oh,
through Istanbul, across the border into Greece, and made his way down into Athens, where he was now sort of working as just a cash in hand, day jobs, literally one day at a time,
wow.
and trying to figure out how he could get into Europe. And so when he found out that I was flying to someplace else, I was up to Slovenia, I think, at that point.
Hmm.
He asked if they were checking passports at the airport, because he'd never been through an airport. He'd never flown.
Right.
So he had no concept of this. And so he's like, do they check passports? I have this, fake passport at this time. He's now admitting to me.
Yeah.
And he was really nervous about, trying to fly anywhere. And he shared his story about just having to travel and escape and pay these human traffickers. At one point, in the middle of the winter, he was lost with this group of other refugees who were being shuttled across the border. And they were in this forest on the Turkish-Greek border there. And just out of trauma, PTSD, basically, he woke up in the middle of the night screaming. Just, it's freezing cold. He's shivering under this blanket. It's snow on the ground in this forest. And he wakes up and he's absolutely just terrified and screaming. And the human trafficker guy, who they'd all paid these thousands of dollars to get him across the border, comes rushing up to him and holds a knife to his throat and tells him to shut up, or I'll give you something to shut up about. And basically just he threatened his life. He was the only one who spoke his language out of the group of people that were going. And it was just this horrific experience. So he's sharing all this information with me through his story and then trying to figure out how he can get to Romania. And I said, listen, I don't know that there's anything I can do to help you. All I know is that they're going to check a passport and, I wish you the best. Like, I don't know, there comes a point where you don't know what you can do.
You don't.
So I, fell asleep, got up the next morning, and I had to get up early to head to the airport to head out. And I head down to the front desk. And, he'd given me a false name originally. And so I walked up to the front desk and I said, do you know the so-and-so who's in room number 8 with me or whatever? And they're like, yeah. I was like, do you think I could pay an extra couple nights for him? And the lady looked at me really weird. And I was like, we got, he was a good guy, had a good conversation. I just thought, he could use another couple nights because he's still trying to figure out where his next destination is. And she's like, yeah, sure. Okay. So I put down my credit card, pay another 2 nights, I think, for him to stay in the hostel. Yeah. And I left a note. I had a postcard that had been given me that I sort of left, slid right next to his bed there so he'd find it, just saying, hey, hope all goes well, give me a message if you feel like it. We're still in contact to this day. Wow. He has successfully made it through to Germany now, and is reestablishing and rebuilding his life there. But I think the thing that I really pulled out of that first encounter, really, before I really had a deep encounter with a lot of other refugees, was just how tragic their stories are, what they've been through to get to a new life, and how just a simple single act of kindness can totally alter someone's future.
It surely can. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. That's just amazing. And you don't think how much something so small can mean so much to someone, and helping them just kind of reestablish something is just even better. And it's got to be a good feeling to know that, it doesn't really care what you did monetarily or whatever the case is, but you all know that they're actually on the path to do something better. It's probably more rewarding to hear about than anything else. So you're like, this man has went through this, but now is thriving. And it just has to be a good feeling to know.
Yeah. It really, those encounters, things like that particularly that first instance, just really sort of took the camera lens and just like batted it to the side and shifted it. So it's now I'm looking at it from a completely different angle. And I'm like, oh, okay. There's a reason people live like this and want to do this. Yeah.
They want it better. Wow. Could you share a particularly memorial or impactful moment from your journey that stayed with you and how it influenced your perspective on hope, creativity, and acceptance? And then you kind of, I don't know if you mentioned a lot about this in your memoir, but you talked about being over on the island for longer than expected because of the pandemic. Can you talk a little bit about that experience and how that kind of the world pandemic kind of took your life by storm and just really changed everything? How did that happen? How did you cope with that, honestly, during that such crazy time?
Oh, wow. Okay. So multiple questions here rolled into one. So
let's bring them all up. Bring them all up.
Yeah. Well, let's start with sort of the setup here, I suppose. And that's, how did this story even come to be? How did this sort of, book even come to life? And that was in early of March 2020. I decided that, spring break was around the corner. I was working at a school in Iraq and working on my master's degree at the same time. And just, it was kind of just an intense period. I was kind of trying to race towards the end of this paper that I was going to get done. And, just, living in another culture that's not your own is its own challenge. And regardless of where you are in the world. And so I said, okay, I'm going to go someplace and just disconnect for a week. Let's, spring break, downtime. I want to kind of go partly off grid and just chill out and, have a Zen week, right? So I pack a carry-on bag. I'm going to go for, 5 days to this Greek island.
So European of you, by the way.
I know, right?
Backpack and just go. Like, I could never do that. I'm like, I need 3 bags. I need like this outfit change. I need all these things. Like, you're just like, I got a bag. I'm just gonna go do this.
Let's go. Well, it does help that I'd traveled a lot and I'd worked as a flight attendant for a number of years, so I knew how to go.
So you got the skill.
That's another interview. But anyway, so we'll save that for the travel podcast.
Yes.
Anyway, so I end up showing up to this Greek island. The day I arrived, the World Health Organization used the words global pandemic, and all the dominoes started to fall, borders started to shut down, and what was going to be a 5-day vacation on this Greek island extended into 5 months. And of course, at the time, nobody knew how long it was going to be. You were just sort of told by the officials of the world, 2 weeks, quarantine another 2 weeks. Oh, well, just another 2 weeks and this will be over. And it was just this indefinite rolling period of 2 weeks on 2 weeks, with just my carry-on bag on this Greek island, partly disconnected, terrible Wi-Fi. No, it was just this. I was pretty isolated, and I was the only guest in the hotel where I was staying for 4 out of the 5 months that I was on the island. So I basically had run of the place. It was pretty impressive, really, on a level. I tell people that it was a phenomenal experience I wish to never repeat.
You did go. You said you want to be isolated, and you were isolated, but not in the level of isolation that you were expecting.
Very much so, yeah. So, part of what helped me get through that whole experience was there's a meditation program that a friend of mine sent me early on. And the hotel where I stayed had their own little private yoga studio right on the beach. Nice. And the owner, basically was super kind and just said, look, this is act of God. Like, I can't charge you full price for staying here indefinitely. So just pay me a monthly rent. Here's the keys to the laundry room. Take care of yourself. And, keep your distance. No one wants COVID. So, do your thing. So I did. And, it's, on the surface of it, it sounds like this phenomenal, like, oh my gosh, you got quarantined for 5 months on a luxury resort on a Greek island with your own private yoga studio, which sounds amazing. And on one level, it is. It really was incredible. But when you're also trapped indefinitely with no source of income, no, sort of continued prospect of, where are you going? What are you doing? How are you going to make ends meet? What's your purpose? Why are you even here? Did you accidentally end up moving to Greece and now you're stuck here forever? Like, I just had all these issues. And so then I think what really helped me sort of piece all this together was discovering the refugee camp partway through the time on the island, and beginning to see the experiences and the stories that these people were having mirrored in my own sort of warped capitalist version of being a refugee. And so now I'm able to sort of make a stark comparison and be like, okay, clearly my situation is nowhere near as bad as some of these people that I'm teaching and helping. But at the same time, there's a shared human experience. Like, we're all experiencing a loss of home, a loss of normality, a loss of connection with loved ones and friends. And so using that as the jumping off base point really helped me exercise those empathy muscles and be like, okay, I get this. I understand, at least on a certain level, what these people are experiencing, because I'm experiencing a similar base value, base emotion. So the thing that really kicked off the entire aha moment for me to write the book then was actually an experience before I showed up on the island again. I was in mainland Greece for a couple of days traveling around, and I was hiking through a series of monasteries up in central Greece, and got to the end of this hiking trail to the smallest, it's the smallest little monastery at the end. And I almost gave it a miss because I'd already seen the biggest and best and the most expensive art collection, whatever it was, and the oldest. So I get to this last one, I was like, okay, I guess I'll go in. So I go in, and it's the only monastery out of the 6 that I visited that had an actual monk sat there at the front desk repairing a TV set. And it was just sort of this odd, like, what? Like,
I mean, yeah, because I'm thinking like a monk. I'm thinking, and please educate me. I'm thinking that okay, you're distancing yourself from technology and everything that there is, and you're just like you're fixing a TV. Huh,
right?
okay.
Yeah, it was this odd, like, one of these things is not like the other moment.
Right, right, yeah, yeah. You're like, huh, okay,
Because here's this guy, he's in full, like, black, monk's robes with a, hat and the
yeah,
whole full beard and everything. And he's
wow,
got this, like, soldering iron and he's just sitting there, like, fixing the circuit board. And so I got to talking with him, and his English was passable. And we were able to just communicate. And he basically let me know that he used to work as one of the frontier Coast Guard members, basically collecting refugees from these boats that were drifting across the Mediterranean and
wow,
either turning them back, which is the unfortunate reality of what happens to a lot of them, or bringing them in for processing at the asylum seeking center on the islands.
wow.
And that he was from Samos, where I was going. And that one night he had a dream that Jesus came to him on the water and told him to quit his job and become a monk. And so he did. The next day he got up and he I had a literal dream and literally followed it and became a monk
Well,
and moved to central Greece. And now he sort of works on repairing home electronics for people because he was trained as an engineer, I guess. And that was kind of his way of giving service back.
right.
And I just thought it was so fascinating to hear this guy's story. And how he sort of had this disconnect with, presumably helping refugees, but really not. Either, turning them back or basically imprisoning them,
Right.
and realizing that he needed to do something different with his life. And so he did. And it wasn't until almost a year later, after I had left Samos Island and returned to Iraq, that I remembered this encounter with this monk. And that I potentially had been helping teach English to some of the same people that he had once imprisoned.
Wow.
And that, as a sort of bookend to the whole experience, was like, I need to tell this story. Like
Yeah.
that, it just gave me chills to think about how our lives and our paths had all intersected and crossed in that way, and it had made such a difference in so many people's lives. Yeah.
Oh, I could only imagine. And, we got to look, and I like to look at it both sides. And, maybe his journey was a little different, but also, was he in prison because it was just something he was doing? Is it something he thought he was right? Because we look at some of these people and we look at historical facts of people doing these things, they are thinking they're doing it for the better cause. And all I think of is I saw Zone of Interest recently in the theater.
Yes, great film. Great film.
Great film. And I'm thinking, what you're doing is probably wrong, but you think you're doing it for the right reasons. And it's almost like, do I feel bad for this person, or do I they live in like a bubble or shell life of what they think they're doing, or they're influenced by someone else. So it's got to be like, and you look back at this, you're probably just like, wow, that is something else to imagine that. And then also think about what is that process, and maybe looking back, hopefully, you have an epiphany, like you said, and you are just like, I need to change my ways. I need to understand something more, or there's something more that I want to get out of this or out of life in general.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's really understanding that people have those sort of gray zones in their life where they are on the fence. They are undecided as to what they're doing is good or bad, or they are just doing it because this is the paycheck, right? Like, is there morality tied to this? No, this is just my livelihood. And one of the examples that comes to my mind is in the city where I was living in Iraq. There's a museum dedicated to as a memorial to the genocide of the Kurds, of the Kurdish people in the region there. And recently, in the past sort of 5 or 6 years, they opened an extension exhibit that details and documents a lot of the work that ISIS had done, a lot of the damage that they had done in the region. And so there's, all the martyrs who, people who've been killed by ISIS, and exhibit of various things that have been sort of captured and pulled out as to be preserved. And in that museum, there's this display case that has all of these like rubber stamps that they would use, that ISIS would use to stamp their documents and make them official, for their own whatever it is that they were attempting to achieve. And every time I look at that, it gives me just this moment of like, there's probably some office lady who's just sat there stamping documents because
Hmm.
she's getting
Hmm.
paid to do it. And she doesn't think she's there to, you know, overthrow the Western world or to, bring the downfall of,
I can't
whatever.
imagine that was her job application. You'll be overthrowing societies, people, genocide. Are you sure you're okay with this job?
Right? Like nobody walks into it.
You might get a different response if that was something that you were asked. Yeah, yeah.
Right? It doesn't matter how evil sounding your name is, Joel David Bond. You're never going to find it. Right?
It's crazy. Yeah, you're so right. It's great because you don't think about those things.
Yeah,
You don't.
and maybe, and likely, somebody who is sitting there stamping those documents recognizes that, okay, I'm having a moral dilemma here or an ethical dilemma of some sort. And,
Sure.
just like Zone of Interest in the film there and the Nazi war camps. And just, I mean, there's multiple facets. It's not just a simple black and white. And I think that's really one of the key things to helping develop empathy is just recognizing that we all sort of live in these shades of gray from time to time. And,
absolutely. Yes.
And being able to identify that in yourself is what can help you sort of empathize with others who are caught in similar situations.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Wow. Such great, great stories, great connections. And so in the title of your book is As Large as Your Spirit. Like I said, we talk about exploring the acceptance of one's self and others. How has the writing and sharing of this memoir influenced your journey of self-acceptance? And what messages do you hope readers take away from your story? Because you've been doing a couple of speaking engagements. Is that correct? Or getting out there? Okay.
Yeah.
How's that been?
So, it's been fun to be able to just get out there and share some of these stories and to really just get this message out there that empathy is something that we really need more of. And how do you practice and, train that skill? And then also just what does it take to connect with people who are different from you? Because I think that's really, it's all, we all find it easy to connect with people who are like us, but it's the diversity of the world that makes life so interesting and connecting across those lines that help you build new concepts and ideas. And so, I think for me, the biggest sort of message from this book is, what does it take to really connect with others? And that's coming to an acceptance of yourself. You can't truly connect and empathize with other people. You can't really cross those boundary lines until you know who you are. And let other people help you discover that.
Yeah,
so, I think for me, as you read through the story, I went through this journey of sort of self-acceptance, a long journey of self-acceptance on what it means to be a gay man, a gay Christian man, and how to make all that sort of mesh in my own personhood. And in the memoir, it talks a lot about sort of just dealing with coming to an acceptance of that in myself, finding that sort of home in my own identity as I'm searching for my physical home to go back to Iraq. And at the same time, sort of sharing this experience with all these other people who are searching for a physical home as refugees, but also looking to rebuild their identities in the process as they move to new places. So the whole thing is this, story of looking for home physically, but really on a spiritual and metaphorical level. What does it mean to really come to a central acceptance of yourself?
That's really good. And then, when you were out, how's the reaction been to the book? Like, has people come up to you and said, this is really something I could connect with? Is something that really opened up my eyes? How has the reviews, but also, well, not that you dive into reviews because God knows you shouldn't do that. But I think when you're talking with other people about it, how are their general reactions to the story and to the book?
So far, I've had really positive reviews. People have really, connected with it. They've, the number one comment that I get about my writing in particular is that it just feels like they're there. Like they can just see the scenario. It's like the movie scene just being played out in front of them on the pages. And so there's a real connection on that level. Super pleased as well. I submitted to the Best Independent Book Awards and it placed as a 4th round finalist. So super pleased that there's a little bit of acceptance out there for the quality of the work. And so, and it's been kind of a fun journey to just kind of get the story out there and to share it with people. At the end of the day, I really wrote it for me. I wrote it because I needed to.
Yeah.
I had this spark of inspiration and then the 99% grunt work to actually get it done. um, but at the end, I needed to write it because I needed to process my own experience and to sort of finally come to that acceptance of myself and where I was in the world and what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And we all evolve and grow and continue to change. And so it's not like, I've now arrived, but
I'm here. Yeah.
but I needed, you sort of need to have a chapter of your life. You're like, okay, like I'm ready to sort of process that season and see what that means for me. So writing the book really was mostly that. And I'm super pleased that other people have really enjoyed it.
That's amazing. And, and sidetrack, we talk about, being a gay man in the Middle East. Like how was that experience? I mean, because we all hear it's not the best.
Yeah.
How do you worry every day about your safety? How do you worry about just living your life? Like, I know it happens, but it's just like, it's got to be so hard to move through that. While you're obviously doing such great things in this world that you are and being an amazing human that you are. How did you really cope with that? How, what can you let others know about that experience and hopefully educate them and help them feel okay with being like, listen, it's self-acceptance. It's who you are. And you can't really put on a facade forever, because I feel like you're not going to be your authentic self. You're also not going to really represent the best of yourself to people. And you just are not going to be able to really connect and feel whole, as a person. So how was that for you overall? Like, how was that experience?
Well, hand on heart, on a stack of holy books, taking an oath here, I would say one of my initial motivations to move to Iraq was to try and escape from myself. There are a whole host of reasons why I moved, but one of them on the list was I believed that I couldn't be gay in Iraq. And it was at a time when I was really trying to sort of reconcile that with my spirituality and kind of wanted to sort of, change that aspect of myself. And of course, I moved to Iraq and within 3 months actually found a long-term boyfriend who I was with for a number of years.
Oh,
I was like, oh, I guess you can be gay in Iraq.
Kind of worked out for you. Okay.
I know, right? So, my initial motivation was like, oh, okay, well, this isn't going to work out in the long run, is it?
Yeah, you're like, okay, good. I'm on the path.
But, I think that experience really did a lot to help me down that road of self-acceptance, because it's like, oh, okay, this is really just a part of who I am. One part of many parts, like this is not my whole identity. And
absolutely,
even in the book, as I talk about coming to terms with my sexuality, it is a theme in the book, but it's not the theme. I really wanted to make sure that was clear for people that this is not just some, gay memoir here. This is actually like, oh, it's just a guy who was stuck in Greece in the pandemic, and we all have these human emotions. And oh, by the way, he is gay, and it was hard for him to figure that out. So, among many other things. And living in Iraq, culturally, just it is unaccepted. And so it was just a case of being very quiet. Not, really being overt about any of it. Of course, there's always the question of like, do you have a wife? Are you married? Are you gonna, are you looking for anybody? Oh, my daughter is single. Would you like to meet her? And you come up with your phrases to sort of delicately navigate those cultural questions without throwing things in people's faces, because that's not going to end well.
Yeah.
And
you learn to pivot.
You pivot is a good word. You turn the conversation, or you just sort of say, what I really wanted to say to a lot of people who, I knew wouldn't be accepting and came from a very religious background, is I just said, God hasn't opened my heart to that as a possibility yet.
Wow. Okay.
And that would be kind of a really good way to say, oh, okay, we're not going to argue with God.
We're not going to go against him, or her, or they.
All of the above.
All the above,
yeah.
Wow.
So,
wow, that was good. And hopefully, and I think as time gets more, obviously, it's not going to be accepted everywhere, but I do think, we have to stop the stigma of feeling like you can't always be accepted, you can't always do whatever. Obviously, it can't be as grand as it is living in the West Village and.
I know, right? Yeah. I mean,
living. Yeah, obviously, like living in New York City. Okay, great. You know what I mean? But like, or the Castro, San Francisco. No, but it's also, it is possible, and maybe,
yeah.
we'll talk about this hopefully in other podcasts when it comes to, gay travels. Like there's a world out there that it's so different and it's
Yeah.
not a big deal. And it's like you said, it's not part of who you are. It's more of like you're just living your life and have full acceptance. And
Yeah.
it's not that thing.
I think what's really hopeful about that whole situation, particularly in the Middle East, is that the younger generation in general is far more blasé. They're like, oh, okay, big deal. The older generation are far more conservative. And I think as we move from generation to generation, there will be more acceptance. It's just they're not at the same sort of bell curve, that we might be here in the States. But, they're on that track somewhere. And I think as we continue to just progress as society, that hopefully there'll be more acceptance across the board.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm hoping for that as well. So we go back to empathy. For the common man is lost. But how do we get it back, Joel? How do we get empathy back? What is your idea of how someone could get back to being the most authentic, empathetic, spiritually open, understanding person in the world? I'm actually making this person up in my head, but ideally, I know they're probably existing somewhere out there. All the things I want people to be, and I'm like, I'm probably stretching
for the unicorn, Dak. You're looking for the unicorn.
I really am. It's not. I don't know. I think I found in my partner, but he's kind of crazy because he seems to just want to be a fun-loving kid. But I think ideally he's part of those things. But I think how do we do that? Because I could be cold-hearted as the next person and not think about anyone else. I mean, I think about some of the things I see when I see homeless in New York City. I'm like, well, I could help them, but what am I really helping them do? I can offer food, of course. I could offer money, but then I'm more if I offer money and they're buying booze. But then it's also like, okay, if you're just offering something, that's great, but what are we really doing to help them?
Yeah.
So how can you really get it back to this level of empathy, but be okay with it? Understand empathy could be in many shapes and forms as well. I just want people to know that it's not you have to say it this way, you have to do it this way. Because I think one of the things that, and you probably learned this in your spirituality and with Christianity, and I grew up as a Christian, I think it's this tone of like loving God and serving God, but then it's almost like you exclude at the same time, which I never understood as a kid. Mm-hmm. I love God. I love my spirituality, but I don't think God is that judging. And I looked around the people in my church and other people in religion and family, and I'm like, I don't think that's how God would want us to do that. So that's what made me realize my level of empathy and realizing that, hey, that's not how I want to go in life,
Yeah.
And for me, it was me learning to be there for my friends and my chosen family, and that level of empathy has helped me. Helping them really helps me. So if I did anything to help any of my friends, I felt I did something. It was listening, offering a place to stay, cooking dinner, hosting an event, whatever the case was. I felt that I gave them something back to really help them further where they're getting in their life today, which was my level of empathy. But
I think you've really touched on a lot of key concepts there on what it takes. I think empathy in general, I mean, I don't think it's lost. I think it's like a muscle that atrophies. And it takes work, it takes practice, it takes exercise. And if you don't, you do fall out of the practice of it. But, as long as you are aware of that and you can come back to it and practice that empathy muscle, then you'll, be able to do those sorts of things. You never arrive. You'll never be the unicorn, most empathic person in the world. But it's recognizing, what can you do and how can you make those connections? And so for me, I think really the key is, the classic phrase by Socrates is know thyself. If you know who you are and can tap deep into your own inner being, if you can look into your own heart and see what are your values, your responses, your needs, wants, desires, all those sorts of things, then from that space, you're then able to take a look at other people's experiences and see where their values might match with yours, and they're just expressed differently.
Yes.
or where there's what's the common thread that unites you and this other person, other than just we're both human beings? Is there an emotion in this moment? Is there a situation where you've both encountered a very similar thing? And it's learning to really take a look at what's happening in the world around you, and recognizing that there are shared universal values and experiences that help us connect.
Yeah.
So, can you help every single person that you cross on the streets? No. Are we designed as human beings to bear the burden of all human suffering that we see on the news every day? No. I think that's
Right. No.
absolutely incomprehensibly impossible to do. Like, you just can't do that. It's just crushing. So you do have to be selective. And you do that by recognizing what's in your power. What are your skills? What are your abilities as an individual to then give back to the world in those avenues? And so I may not be the billionaire philanthropist who can just hand out $10 bills to every homeless person on the sidewalk, but I can bring extra food to the food pantry down the street and have direct people there and say, hey, there's free bread in the food pantry, go grab it. There are things like that where it's like, what's within your power, what's in your scope, within your limitation as a human being, and you work from that space. Ultimately at the end of the day, our greatest strengths are born out of what were once our weaknesses. And so wherever you were once hurt is where you are most positioned to serve others.
That is so, wow, you really hit something, because I remember back then, well, I think maybe back I was early high school. I always I had this one jacket I loved, right? Best jacket ever, at least I thought it was.
Yeah.
And I remember I lost my jacket. And I'm going to blame my mom, but also I think my mom was teaching me something at the same time. I lost my jacket because I was being stupid, take it off, kid, not paying attention, and I lose it. I'm just so mad because it was my favorite jacket. And my mom says, you lost it. Okay. Well, here's another one. It's not going to be as fancy, but you'll learn. So I take this nice I say sweater is the best word to use. I take the sweater. It's not as great as the jacket I lost. And I'm still like reveling in the fact that I lost that jacket. Then it turns out we had a lost and found. And kid you not, we had a lost and found. It was in the lost and found. I don't know why I didn't think to look there first. Also, I'm like a younger kid. I'm not thinking of anything most these days. But I never thought to look there. Found it there. And as I was walking home, and I grew up in the Bay Area, so we had not a lot, but we had many people that were homeless and things like this in the area. And I thought about, I'm so thankful to be able to have different jackets and different things I can give me. My family's given. This person doesn't have this. And also, I had lost this jacket. Yeah, I'm a little hurt and I missed it and I'm connected to it. But for those few days I didn't have it.
Yeah.
But maybe someone else can have it. Someone else needs it. And so I ended up giving the jacket to this homeless guy. Super grateful. And the craziest thing is we'd see him not too far from school, but he was somewhere in the neighborhood. And I see him with that jacket every day. And for some reason, he always had a smile on his face after that. And so for me, I literally was like, okay, so what I do every year, at least here in New York City, because it gets very cold, is I donate a bunch of jackets. Because one of my things is jackets. I love jackets. I love coats. I love all these different accessories. Yeah. Why? I don't know, but it's one of the things. But every year I donate to the winter warmth jackets kind of drive we have. We have one at work. We have one in our local community center. And I always think to myself in my very bougie way of like, if I can have this high level of fashion, I think everyone else deserves to have it too. And so I pass it on to everyone else. Nice. And I'm like, this is a great way to give back because I'm blessed to have things and I don't really need them all the time. I have multitudes of jackets, but people out here are freezing, don't have jackets. And yes, I can't give, like you said, I can't give $10. I can't give all the money in the world, but if I can give a piece of this to someone else, or at least give them warmth or comfort in this cold, frigid world that we live in and in New York City, I feel a little good about that. And if I have to see you on the street with it, it'll make me more happier.
Yeah.
Because I know it went to a good cause. It went to something. It helps you in one way or another. Simple. It's just simple as that, as a jacket.
Yeah.
And I try to remind people
act of kindness changes someone's life.
It doesn't have to be grand. I think we do have this mindset like we have to do grand things. Sure, that's great. But you don't need to always do that. That's not a requirement.
Yeah, I mean, some of us just can't. We are limited in our capacity, and so you do what you can, and leave the rest to the universe. Really, I mean,
Seriously.
higher power, God, or whoever,
whoever you believe in, you can do that. Well, yeah, that's just been so great, Joel. I really appreciate it. And now, your book, As Large as Your Spirit, where can people get a copy of it?
Yeah, it's on Amazon, on all the global markets there. So, As Large as Your Spirit, a reverse refugee memoir by Joel David Bond. And I'm also on the internet, joeldavidbond.com, and also on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. You'll find me as well. All at Joel David Bond.
You still use Facebook? That's a lot.
I know. Yeah, I'm getting old. Apparently.
Yeah, I remember what Facebook used to be back in the day. You're like, oh, you're being right? College and using it. Like now, it's like everything. I mean, or they call it Meta, as they call it, but I don't ever call
it Meta. Right? Like, I'm on the internet. Find me. That's all.
Find me. Google me. Google me. That's the new slang. Google me. You will know everything about someone if you Google them, good or bad. I'm just saying, you'll find everything you need to know.
Yeah, it's all out there.
Well, Joel, thank you so much for being on. I hope to have you back again. We can talk some more travel and different things as well. All the best of luck to you out there with your success of your book, and stay well and stay being a good human being. Appreciate all the work you do.
Thank you so much.
Talk to you soon.